The professor thought he could crush me with one humiliating comment, just like he had done to countless others before. He was convinced this was his stage, his moment of triumph. But within minutes, the entire class was laughing at him, not me. A day later, his name was a viral meme. 2 days later, the university was scrambling to erase him. But let's start from the beginning. You ever walked into a place and immediately knew you were stepping into enemy territory? Like the second you crossed the threshold, you could feel the hostility in the air, the weight of 1,000 silent judgments pressing down on you. Yeah, that was exactly the vibe in Professor Malcolm Reed's lecture hall that morning. Stanford, the crown jewel of West Coast academia, a place where students with overpriced sneakers and even pricier opinions sat around debating which world issue they'd pretend to care about today. And in the middle of it all, Professor Reed. Reed wasn't just any professor, he was a brand. The kind of guy who turned his classroom into a stage and himself into the star. He preached radical theories with the enthusiasm of a used car salesman, and if you didn't nod along, you were the problem. The man thrived on confrontation. He didn't just welcome debate, he engineered it, bending it in his favor like a magician rigging his own trick. And that's when he walked in. Barron Trump. The second his name flashed on the class roster, something changed. Reed's smirk twitched to life like a shark catching the scent of blood. Oh, he was loving this. The son of a former president, walking voluntarily into his domain. It was like a late Christmas gift. Reed cleared his throat dramatically and paced toward the center of the room, the self-satisfied glint in his eyes sharpening. This wasn't just a moment. It was an opportunity. Ah, he muttered just loud enough for the class to hear. The prince himself. A few scattered chuckles rippled through the room. Not an explosion of laughter, more like nervous titters, students glancing at each other, waiting to see where this was going. Because everyone knew what came next. Reed had built his career on moments like these, the well-timed humiliation, the rhetorical takedown that would echo through campus for weeks. And now, he had Barron Trump sitting right in front of him. This was practically a sport to the guy. Reed leaned against his desk, folding his arms, his smile stretching just a little too wide. So, Mr. Trump, he said, voice slow and syrupy, how does it feel knowing you're probably the least qualified person in this entire university? The air turned thick. Even the students who had chuckled earlier stiffened in their seats. Nobody expected Reed to open with a kill shot. Barron didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. Reed wasn't finished. Oh, come now, he continued, tapping a finger against his chin as if he were deep in thought. We should discuss legacy admissions. Such a fascinating topic. Would you like to share your personal experience? More laughter, this time nervous, uneasy, because while some students found this hilarious, others were shifting in their seats, glancing at Barron to see how he'd react. And Barron? He didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't fold. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, like he was studying Reed under a microscope. Then, in a voice so calm it almost felt dangerous, he said, I'd love to, but first, I think we should discuss your qualifications, or lack thereof. And just like that, boom, the classroom erupted. Laughter, gasps, scattered ohs. Someone in the back whistled. Reed's smirk? Gone. You ever see a guy who spent his whole life talking down to people suddenly realize he's standing in quicksand? That was Professor Malcolm Reed in that moment. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to them laughing at him, especially not because of some undergrad. His eyes flicked across the room, narrowing as the laughter grew. The students weren't just amused, they were entertained. Some were leaning in, their eyes practically sparkling. This wasn't just another one of Reed's performances. This was something different. This was new, and he hated it. Excuse me? He scoffed, yanking at his tie like it was suddenly suffocating him. Barron didn't move, didn't blink, just leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking completely relaxed, dangerously relaxed. I'm just saying, he said smoothly, you talk a big game about privilege, but let's take a step back and look at the facts, shall we? A beat. Oh, he had the room. Barron's voice stayed even, but there was something sharp underneath it, something that made people sit up and listen. You got tenure in record time, he continued, his tone casual, like he was reading off a grocery list. Published exactly one book, conveniently aligned with the university board's political agenda. And, oh yeah, you've been caught plagiarizing at least twice. The moment that last word left his mouth, a ripple went through the class. Heads turned. A few students instinctively grabbed their phones. Reed's face twitched. "That's enough," he snapped, his voice cracking through the room like a whip. And just like that, the room went silent. But it wasn't the silence he wanted. It wasn't respect. It wasn't authority. It was the silence of people realizing that the guy running the show might just be full of it. Barron tilted his head slightly, his expression cool. "Are you denying it?" he asked, his voice smooth as glass. "Because if you are, I'd be happy to pull up some sources." There it was, the challenge. Reed's face darkened. His hands flexed at his sides. His jaw clenched so tight it looked like he was grinding his teeth into dust. Oh, he was denying it. Of course he was. But the students weren't buying it. And that was worse than any insult Barron could have thrown at him. Because now there were whispers. Now people were checking. A few students had already started scrolling on their phones. A girl in the second row nudged the guy next to her, her eyebrows shooting up. Whatever she just found? It wasn't good. Reed felt it. The control slipping through his fingers, the attention shifting away from him. So he did what people like him always do when they're backed into a corner. He got dirty. Reed's lips curled into a slow, deliberate smile. The kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. "Well," he said, his voice almost amused, "I suppose that makes sense." A pause, then, "After all, your father is a professional liar." Silence. Not the kind that lingers after a joke. Not the kind that comes when people are waiting for a punchline. No, this was the kind of silence that settled deep, the kind that made the air feel heavy. The students' expressions changed. Some jaws actually dropped. Because that was personal. Barron's entire body tensed. And for the first time since he walked into that classroom, he looked angry. For a second, just a split second, time froze. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire class sat in stunned silence, their gazes bouncing between Barron and Reed, like they had just stumbled into the front row of a heavyweight fight. And in a way, they had. Because Malcolm Reed, he wasn't just a professor. He was that professor. The kind who made an art form out of public humiliation. The kind who turned his classroom into an arena where he played the role of both the judge and the executioner. But right now, he looked like a man cornered. And Barron, he wasn't just standing up. He was standing tall, slow, deliberate, unshaken. No rushed movements, no hesitation. Just complete control. The second he pushed himself up from his chair, the energy in the room shifted. Students leaned in. Laptops and notebooks sat forgotten on desks. The quiet hum of whispers had vanished, replaced by something heavier, anticipation. Reed's fingers curled around the edge of his desk. His usual smirk, gone. His posture, rigid. For the first time since this whole thing started, he looked like a man who wasn't sure if he should be standing his ground or running for cover. Barron studied him for half a second, then tilted his head slightly. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "I get it." A pause. "You hate my family." Reed stiffened. "That's fine." The way Barron said it, it wasn't defensive, it wasn't bitter, it was just a fact. The same way someone might acknowledge that the sky was blue or that coffee in the library cost way too much. Reed's jaw twitched, like he was bracing himself for the butt. And Barron delivered. "But let me tell you something." His voice stayed steady, cold, sharp, the kind of tone that didn't waver. "No amount of grandstanding or cheap insults is going to change the fact that I worked to get here." A heartbeat of silence, then the dagger. "Unlike you." The classroom detonated. Scattered chuckles turned into full-blown applause. A few students actually cheered. Someone in the back whistled. And Reed, for the first time ever, he looked shaken. The arrogance, the smugness, it wasn't just gone. It had been ripped away, like a magician whose trick had just been exposed under stadium lights. Barron watched it happen in real time. But he wasn't done, not even close. He took a single step forward, just enough to invade Reed's space, just enough to make it very clear that he wasn't intimidated. "You act like you're better than me," Barron continued, voice smooth, "but all you do is repeat opinions you think will make you sound smart." Reed's mouth pressed into a thin line. "You don't teach, you perform." Barron's eyes gleamed. "You cherry-pick facts, twist history, and shut down anyone who disagrees because, deep down, you know you can't handle a real debate." A low murmur spread through the class. Students glanced at each other, some raising eyebrows, some grinning like they had just witnessed history. A girl near the back muttered under her breath, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Damn." Reed's hands twitched. His fingers flexed, then clenched into fists. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This wasn't even about Barron. This was humiliation. And it was public. Barron had done the unthinkable. He had flipped the script. And Reed, he had nothing. He had spent his entire career making other people uncomfortable, putting them on the spot. Now, he was the one on trial. The worst part, his own students weren't defending him. They weren't backing him up. They were enjoying it. Reed's face reddened as the realization hit. And that's when he did the only thing he could do. He snapped, "Get out of my class." The words came sharper than he intended, more like a desperate bark than a controlled command. But it was too late. The damage was done. The class went dead still. No one was laughing now. No one was even breathing. Barron just smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a forced one. A slow, amused smirk, like he just won a game Reed didn't even know he was playing. Gladly. He grabbed his bag and turned toward the door, but just before stepping out, just before leaving Reed to stew in his own mess, he paused and glanced over his shoulder. "Oh," he said casually, "you might want to check your emails, Professor." Reed frowned, his expression still twisted with frustration. "What?" Barron shrugged, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "I heard the university board loves getting complaints about unprofessional behavior." The color drained from Reed's face. And just like that, Barron was gone. By the next morning, #Fire Malcolm Reed was everywhere. It didn't just trend, it took over. The video of the confrontation spread faster than campus gossip, faster than a free coffee giveaway in the student union. What started as a few shaky phone recordings turned into a full-blown internet phenomenon. Barron's takedown of Reed wasn't just another viral clip, it was the clip. The kind of thing that didn't just live in group chats but exploded across every major platform. Students had recorded everything. From Reed's smug setup to Barron's verbal knockout to that final moment when Reed, the so-called intellectual powerhouse, had cracked under the pressure. And the internet? Oh, the internet had a field day. By 6 a.m., Twitter was already an absolute war zone. Stanford professor gets destroyed by freshman. Watch this. Somebody check on Malcolm Reed, bro, got cooked. Stanford really out here giving tenure to dudes who lose debates to first years? It wasn't just Stanford students talking. Professors from other universities had started weighing in, some defending Reed. This is what happens when we let social media dictate academic freedom. Some laughing at him. Maybe try debating students instead of humiliating them next time. The memes? Relentless. Somebody remixed Reed's "Get Out of My Class" into a soundbite, layering it over clips of people dramatically exiting rooms like they'd just been banished from a medieval kingdom. One guy did a full breakdown of the situation, pausing the video at key moments. "See his hands? Right there. This is when his brain hit the panic button." The comment sections were pure chaos. Bro thought he was going to get a standing ovation and ended up getting a career change. The way he said check your emails like he was ordering his own resignation. Somebody call it we need to delete this man's faculty login ASAP. Instagram? Even worse. The official Stanford account had posted some generic academic news that morning. Bad idea. The comments, y'all hiring professors based on qualifications or just vibes? This what y'all teaching for $80K a year? Delete this man's office key already. And the final nail, a change.org petition. Remove Malcolm Reed from Stanford immediately. It had over 10,000 signatures before the university even had time to draft a response. By noon, Stanford had no choice but to say something. The official statement dropped, carefully worded, full of vague, empty phrases like, "We take these matters seriously," and "We are committed to fostering a respectful learning environment." Translation: "We are panicking. Please stop tagging us." They promised an internal review of Professor Reed's conduct, which, in university terms, basically meant, "We are waiting to see how much worse this gets before we decide to throw him under the bus." But it didn't take long. By the next day, they announced that Malcolm Reed had been placed on indefinite suspension. Translation: They were cutting him loose. Meanwhile, Barron? He strolled onto campus the next morning like nothing had happened. No grand entrance, no victory lap. Just him, walking to class, earbuds in, completely unbothered. Except now, people knew him, and they respected him. The whispers in the hallways weren't the usual empty gossip. They were acknowledgement. That's him. Dude, that was legendary. He really stood up to Reed like it was nothing. It wasn't hero worship. It wasn't fake admiration. It was something different. Real respect. People weren't stopping him for selfies or asking him to say the line. There was no over-the-top fanfare, just quiet nods, side glances, that subtle shift in the way people moved when they passed him in the hallways, like they had just walked past someone who mattered, like they had walked past someone who had done something they wished they had the guts to do. Because Barron hadn't just stood up for himself, he had shut down a bully who had been untouchable until now, and it was glorious. How would you have handled the situation if you were in Barron's place? Would you have been able to stand up to a professor like that? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever faced something similar? How did you deal with it? Drop a like if you found this story interesting, and let's keep the conversation going. Stories like this aren't just about drama. They're about shining a light on real issues, like abuse of power in academia, and showing that standing up for yourself matters.